Welcome back. The objective here for this session is to talk about what reading fluency is, why reading fluency is essential, what are some actions that you can take to promote reading fluency, and what are some resources that you can access to promote reading fluency. We know fluency when we see it. People who are fluent, whether that is somebody who is playing a piano, whether that's an athlete, whether it's a cook, we can tell the difference from somebody who has reached that level of fluency compared to somebody who has not reached that level of fluency. In the United States, we had a group called the National Reading Panel, and they conducted a meta-analysis of all the different reading interventions, and they identified fluency as one of the 5 areas that a comprehensive reading program should include. In many ways, what we have to understand is that reading fluency is the bridge to reading comprehension. When we look at the definition of reading fluency, we really look at 3 components. The first is speed, the number of words that can be read in a designated block of time. The second is accuracy. How many of those words are accurate in that block of time? And the third is expression, the ability to modulate your voice the way that the content in the reading exists. So why is reading fluency the bridge to comprehension? It's really because what happens here is what we want when we're comprehending things is we want to free up our brain to think about what we're reading, not to have to think about what is this word, what is this phrase, what is this sentence. So it's this idea that by being fluent, it allows us to think about what we're reading and think about our performance. Some folks look at fluency as being synonymous with automaticity, the ability to do things without really having to think about that. For example, when we want students to develop their spoken language skills, we want them to think about what they want to say, not where they should be placed in their articulators. The same idea is true about reading. So there's a very interesting skill sequence that goes from being a novice to proficient. And we really see this in almost any skill. So we start off with being what we call unconscious incompetence. We don't really know that we're incompetent because we're not conscious of it. And then all of a sudden when we decide that we want to learn something, such as I've been trying to learn the guitar for a while, I realize that I'm conscious of my incompetence. And then as I get better at it, I become conscious of my competence, meaning I know how to transition from this chord to this chord. And this is true about reading, or it's true about any skill. But what we really want to do is to get to the last level, and that is unconscious competence, where I'm not thinking about what I'm doing, I'm competent at it, I'm fluent, I'm automatic, and I'm doing it without putting a lot of mental energy towards that. We can assess speed and accuracy. We can do this by doing 1-minute reading samples. We want to set it up for whatever level that student's at, and what we want the student to do is to read as many words as that student can in that 1-minute period of time. And what we do is we count how many words the student read correctly, and then what we do is we graph that so that the student knows that's our baseline. This is where we are today. And then we use that to practice our fluency over time. We can also assess expression. So when you look at this PowerPoint, you'll see a 5-point fluency scale for oral reading. And it goes from being non-fluent to being fully fluent. So we can assess both speed and accuracy and expression. So what I'm going to talk about now is interventions that repeated readings focus. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to walk you through those different forms of reading, repeated readings, and then I'm going to show you a couple of examples, and then I'm going to try and highlight some of the specific aspects of that. So we're going to start, when we work with young kids, we're going to really focus on letters, okay? Once students are able to identify as fluently and as quickly as possible, then we're going to go to words. And then from words, of course, we're going to move to phrases and sentences, and then we're going to move to passages. So this is the sequence that we want. We want them to be able to go letters, words, phrases, sentence. So when you look at this PowerPoint, you'll see on the top, what we have is capital letters, big letters. So we'll start with those. And so what we want to do is take a block of time, say 30 seconds, and we want to see how many of these capital letters students can identify accurately and with speed. So we'll go straight across and we'll count how many they do. Once they can do capital letters, then we'll go to the small letters and we'll go through the same exact process. Then once we can do capital and small letters, then we'll put them together and we'll have some capitals, some small, and we're going to do the same kind of practice of identifying, telling us the name of the letter, and also trying to do it as quickly as possible. So then we move down and we work on words. And as you can see here, there's a lot of different word lists that you can use. I like the Dolch list, I like the Fry list, but it doesn't really matter. What you want to use is the same sequence of words that students need to learn. As I've said in a previous session, about 60% of words that students come across are these sight words. Many of these words don't have an exact meaning, but we need of and any and other and the and it. So we need to be able to read those quickly and be able to attend to those. So we moved from words. We can then move to what we see here as these high frequency nouns. And these are all these things like, it's exactly like air and book and children and dog. So we want to make sure that they know all these, and what's good about these are concrete things that kids can identify. Once we have words, then we move to phrases such as he had to, she said that, on a, to the, for his. All of these short phrases that they can practice. And at the end of this session, what I'm going to do is I'm going to tell you about a whole bunch of resources that you can access so that you don't have to create these, that these are readily available for you. And they're all graded. Then once we have phrases, then we can go to passages. And we can start with very short passages. As you see on this one right here, this one includes a picture, and it's very short, 4 and 5 word sentences. And it has a lot of the content is embedded so that they know what they're doing. But again, we're going to focus on fluency. Now, it doesn't mean that we can't also focus on text comprehension, because that's always our goal. But what we want to do is to be able to read as quickly as we can, as accurately as we can, and with expression. And when we talk about expression, we're talking about attention to punctuation. So we have very young passages, and then as you see next, we have some expository passages that this one talks about going to the zoo, and it is a lot more dense than that first example that I showed you. And then we can go to something as complicated as how does your body take in oxygen? And here what we have is the content shows the lungs, but it has a lot of information about how we use oxygen to function. So you can choose whatever you want to focus on fluency, but what you have to make sure is that the student can do this at his or her independent reading level so that they are succeeding. Here are some guidelines for developing fluency skills. Number one is explicit modeling of fluent reading. You want to show students what a good reader looks like, somebody who's fluent. So keep in mind those three things: speed, accuracy, and expression. And you want to be explicit about that with students. You want to show them that you're reading as quickly as possible, that you're as accurate as possible, and that you're attending to the commas, the question marks, and the periods, the exclamation points in that. What we want to do also is we want to chart student progress. What students love to do is they love to graph their own progress. How did I do today? And compare themselves to how they did yesterday and how they did the day before. What we want is that aim line to keep going up, because we all love success. And when students see themselves succeeding, their motivation to continue grows. So we want them to chart their own progress. And we want practice to be short and frequent. So we're talking about a very small block of time, as I've mentioned before. 1 minute, 2 minutes, that's all we're talking about fluency practice. A couple of minutes of your comprehensive reading program. And we can make it vary. We can use such a variety of different materials. We can read poems, we can read joke books, we can read whatever it is. What we want is this repeated reading so that students are learning over time that if I practice, I will get better. So when you are creating the materials yourself, what we want to do is pick a passage that's between 100 and 200 words that is right at the right level for students. And that's an important part, is being able to use accurate assessments so that you know where the student is at. Time the student on their first reading of the passage. And then each successive rereading, we're going to time them. And then what we're going to shoot to do is, once they've reached their goal of 75% or 95% accuracy between there, then we're going to move on to the next level and move on so that they're practicing something that is a little bit more complicated. Here's a couple of specific interventions that you can try. The first is for kids who have functional auditory skills, that they can hear themselves. Well, what we want to do is they're going to first silently read a passage, practice. And then what we're going to do is we're going to have them read the passage into a recording device, such as a smartphone or an iPad or an old audio recorder. And then we're going to have the student replay the recording and follow along with the text. So they hear it and they follow along and they pay attention. And then we ask the student to record themselves again. And what we see is that they start seeing themselves as making progress. They're feeling comfortable. They're feeling like they know this. And then they start succeeding. We can also use an intervention called partner reading, where we take a student who is not as fluent and we pair them with a student who is very fluent. So then we make sure that we've selected material that the two of them can read. We ask the fluent student to read first, so they're providing that modeling. We're also having students work together so that they're getting some of their social needs met. We're also allowing them to feel connected to somebody else. Then we have the less fluent student read. And then we set a timer for a minute and we go through what we've practiced before and we see how many words we can read in that 1 minute accurately. Then we reset the timer and we try again. And as I've said before, we're going to graph their scores. Kids love to see themselves making progress. Another intervention is called echo reading. And what happens here is the teacher, an adult, reads one sentence to the student, focusing on accuracy and speed, intonation, and phrasing. Then what we do is we ask the student to copy us. So then the student tries to echo what we have done. So we continue this pattern from one sentence to the next sentence, and then as students get better, we move to 2 sentences, we move to 3 sentences, and then we move to passages. So we keep moving up the ante so that the students are succeeding. Another intervention that students love is reader's theater. And there are multiple resources on the internet that have scripts for readers' theater. So you take 2 and 3 students, and each student has a part in this readers' theater script. And the student practices his or her lines just like an actor does. And then the teacher acts as a director for the play, and this student reads his lines, then this student reads her lines, and then this student reads her lines. And then we produce this, and then we put it on for the rest of the class. So there's a real motivation for learning these skills and then demonstrating these skills. So on your PowerPoint, you'll see a sample script, and what I'm going to do is share with you some resources that you can access these scripts. Another intervention is closed caption media. What you have to understand is closed captions are a wonderful opportunity for students to read text. It's very motivating. But if you've read closed caption, you've noticed that they are very quick, that the vocabulary is sometimes very abstract, and it requires 2 things at one time, and that is reading the captions at the same time as viewing what's going on. This is a very difficult skill, but it's a very motivating skill. So what we want to do is expose students to closed caption, because this is something that they can practice at home on their own. So we have such things as YouTube, which has lots of highly motivating, very short pieces. A lot of it is very humorous. And then we have lots of other material, which is much more of that kind of expository text that students can access themselves and practice reading, that's tied to the content that's being taught in the classroom. Now, a few resources that I'd like you to think about are Reading Rockets, which is a U.S. Department of Education resource that has lots of information on reading fluency. As you might expect, a lot of kids who have learning disabilities or dyslexia have fluency problems. And so there's LD Online that has lots of opportunities. There's a very nice website called Intervention Central that has lots of assessment materials of all the things I talked about: letters, words, phrases, passages, and it grades them all, so you don't have to do that work. And then the Voss Gross Reading Center has very similar materials, as does the Florida Reading Center. I would really encourage you to look at these resources, not only for fluency, but they have it on all 5 of the dimensions of a comprehensive reading program. So just to pull this all together, in summary, the research is very consistent that there is a high correlation between reading fluency and reading comprehension. As I said earlier, it's the bridge. And a lot of it has to do with our working memory and our long-term memory. That what we need to do is to be thinking about what we're reading and not struggling to figure out what these words are, so that we can use our comprehension skills for higher level thinking rather than just trying to figure out what this word is and what this word means. And the last part is I really want to emphasize that this is a component of a comprehensive reading program. As I said earlier, we need to be practicing. And one of the things that we do know is that when you're not good at something, you avoid it. And so what we know quite clearly is that lots of deaf kids on their own do not read because they do not find this to be a pleasurable experience. And so what we want to do is we want to help them develop the skills so that they can enjoy reading just like the rest of us do. So thank you very much.